The party was already loud and flashy long before guests even started eating, and yet everything inside that huge mansion felt like it was carefully arranged to impress strangers. It was the kind of place that made people look around with wide eyes, pretending not to be impressed even though they clearly were. Lights were warm, golden, and soft. Music played from speakers hidden somewhere behind expensive art pieces on the wall. The home smelled like polished wood mixed with perfume and fresh flowers imported from countries most workers had never even heard of. There were glass tables, tall gold vases, sparkling crystal walls, tall windows, and people walking around in designer clothing that looked as if it cost more than a small car. Servers moved between people wearing black uniforms, trying to stay invisible while doing everything at once. They carried trays of drinks, appetizers, and desserts carefully, like each item was more important than they were. One of those servers was a young woman who kept her head down as she worked. People called her Lila. She didn't stand out at first, not because she looked plain, but because she didn't try to stand out. She didn't speak unless someone asked her a direct question. She didn't move too slowly or too quickly. She simply did her job with quiet focus because she needed the money badly. She wasn't new to work like this. She had done other serving jobs before. She had cleaned people's kitchens before. She had wiped down bars at the end of the night before. But this place was definitely the fanciest job she had ever been assigned to. The agency told her she would be paid double if she worked the full night without any complaints. That alone made her say yes. She was exhausted even before she arrived. Her morning had started early. She worked a small breakfast shift at a diner just a few hours prior. She didn't really sleep anymore. She simply took naps between jobs whatever time she could get. But this party wasn't the type she could relax in. Everything here demanded full attention. If she made one mistake, someone would notice. The guests weren't rude, not exactly, but they had a habit of talking loudly near the workers as if workers were furniture. They were comfortable around money, but uncomfortable around people who needed it. Still, Lila stayed calm. She had learned long ago that staying calm made everything easier. If she panicked, she would mess up. If she got emotional, she would lose focus. And she couldn't afford to lose this job. She held a tray of crystal glasses filled with sparkling fruit drinks. She walked carefully past leaning elbows, handbags, sudden turns, and careless movements from people who never worried about work. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her shoes hurt, but she didn't complain. She had learned to deal with pain quietly. The mansion's owner, the millionaire hosting the event, was standing near the main entrance greeting more guests as they continued to arrive. He looked very proud of everything around him. He wasn't dressed like the others. He wore the type of outfit that only people who want to show power wear. When he walked around, he moved like he expected people to give him space. And they did. He didn't have to say anything. His presence alone changed the way people stood or spoke. Some of his guests whispered about business deals, luxury cars on order, new technology ideas, and private trips they were planning. They laughed loudly, bragged lightly, and talked as if none of their words affected the real world. These were people who lived in an entirely separate world from workers like Lila. She took a small break while the string lights overhead shifted their glow slightly. It was only a few seconds. She stepped off to the side near a tall plant, letting her arms rest for a short moment. She quietly looked around, watching everyone, absorbing the energy of the place, wondering what it must feel like to live like them every day. She didn't envy their clothes or money. She envied their freedom. They didn't have to worry about rent. They didn't have to worry about bills. They didn't have to worry about taking separate bus routes just to make it to multiple jobs. She had dreams once, big dreams, but reality made dreams feel foolish. As she walked past one of the connecting hallways, something caught her attention, only for a moment. On the far end of the adjacent room, she saw a grand piano, a beautifully shining one. She recognized the shape instantly, even though she didn't see it fully. It was tall, smooth, and had a strong, glossy black finish. The kind of piano you only ever see in movies or fancy concerts. Her chest tightened for a brief second, but then she forced herself to keep walking like she didn't notice it. She wasn't here to think about music. She wasn't here to think about who she used to be. She was here because she needed money, and money didn't care about feelings. She reached the kitchen area again and set her tray down for it to be refilled. The other temporary workers didn't talk much either. Everyone kept to themselves. They were tired or focused. Some scrolled their phones during tiny breaks. Some checked the time over and over. Lila didn't check her phone. She didn't want to know how much longer she had left. It would only make the night feel slower. When she returned to the main area, she began humming softly under her breath, not even aware she was doing it. It was a habit she had developed over the years. Music was her way of calming her thoughts when stress got too loud inside her head. But she didn't think anyone could hear it. The music from the speakers was loud enough to hide her voice completely. She didn't think about how close she was walking to the mansion owner's group when she hummed. She didn't think anyone even cared enough to notice her existence, but someone did. He noticed her. And his reaction would change the whole direction of the night, not right away. But that moment, the small quiet sound of her voice was the very first step towards something she did not expect. That small, accidental humming was the first whisper of a coming storm, and she had no idea yet. The moment that soft little hum slipped out of her lips, she didn't think anything of it. It was just a small sound, a gentle, familiar sound she always made when her mind drifted away from stress for a second. She didn't sing words, just a tiny tune, something that sounded safe in her head. It made her heart slow down, like a tiny reminder to herself that she was still a human being, not just a machine being used for work. But sadly, that small hum did not go unnoticed. The host of the night, the wealthy man who owned the mansion, suddenly turned his head in her direction. He had been speaking with a group of investors and wealthy people, but that tiny sound pulled his attention toward her. At first, he didn't make it clear that he had noticed. He simply paused his conversation for a moment. His eyes shifted slightly, tracking the sound. A little spark of curiosity grew in his expression. It wasn't an innocent curiosity, though. It was the kind that looked like a challenge had just appeared out of nowhere. He didn't speak about it yet. Not out loud, but something in his mind clearly clicked. Lila continued working like she didn't even realize her voice had shown itself. She moved around, passing drinks again, picking up small plates, making sure no glassware was set on the wrong surface. She was trying her best to be silent and invisible, but she could feel a strange energy start around her. She couldn't explain it. She just had that odd sense that someone was watching. Her instincts were rarely wrong. For a moment, she glanced up and saw the host looking her direction. His smile looked calm. Not angry, not rude, just curious. But it wasn't the type of curiosity that made her feel safe. Instead, it gave her the feeling that she had just been noticed in a way she didn't want. The feeling faded quickly, but she could not shake the little fear in the back of her mind. She kept moving through the room. The evening continued like normal. At least on the surface, the music kept playing. People laughed loudly about stories that didn't matter. Servers kept pacing around calmly. Glasses clinked together like wind chimes. The whole place looked like a perfect, expensive scene that should have been peaceful, but she could sense something else. Something in the air shifted. Something she couldn't see yet. Something she didn't want to become part of. She tried to keep her focus steady. She reminded herself that she only had to make it through a few more hours. Then she could finally go home. She could rest, even if it wasn't a real rest. She could let her feet relax. She could close her eyes. She could breathe normally without stress pressing on her ribs. But that moment of peace still felt very far away. While she collected another set of empty glasses, she overheard two guests nearby talking. One asked, "Did you see the piano in the music room? It's a real Steinway, isn't it?" The other smiled and said, "Of course. He loves having pieces like that. He doesn't even play. He just wants people to know he owns one." The man laughed as if that was a normal thing. Lila tried not to react, but hearing the word Steinway made her chest tighten again. She had learned about instruments a long time ago. She knew how rare and expensive they were. She knew their tone quality, their value, their beauty. Her mind accidentally pictured herself sitting at that bench again like she had once sat in a college practice room. She remembered the way the weight of the keys felt under her fingers. She could almost hear the memory of a rich, warm sound filling an empty space. She blinked hard and forced her mind back into reality. That part of her life was gone. She didn't have the right to think about it anymore. She moved away from the two guests. She didn't want to hear any more about that topic. Eventually, she returned to the kitchen again to stack plates. Her body began to ache. Her shoulders hurt. Her feet hurt the most of all. Her shoes were not comfortable. They were cheap shoes because she didn't have money to buy better ones. That small physical pain became part of her daily life. She used to think she would get used to it, but she never really did. When she finished arranging another tray of drinks to bring out, she heard someone call out to her from behind. "Excuse me, can you come here a moment?" It was the host. She stopped frozen inside herself for a quick second. Why was he calling her over personally? That wasn't normal. Hosts rarely addressed individual workers directly unless something was wrong. She slowly walked toward him. His guests were still standing around him. They stopped talking the moment she approached. He looked at her with a polite smile, but his eyes were sharp. "I heard you humming earlier," he said casually. She froze on the inside. Her face remained calm because she had trained herself to keep emotions hidden while working. But inside her chest there was a moment of fear. Had she broken a rule? Had she made a mistake by making a sound? "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to be distracting." He waved his hand lightly as if brushing away her apology. No, not at all," he said. "It was interesting." That word made her uncomfortable. He continued. "Tell me, do you sing or play music?" You sounded like someone who has a little talent. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to talk about her past. She didn't want to expose anything about herself. She didn't want to relive anything she had left behind. "I just hum sometimes," she said quietly. "It's not anything serious." The host smiled in a way that didn't feel friendly. It felt like the smile of someone who just found a new toy to play with. He nodded toward the music room. "There's a piano in the other room," he said. "A beautiful instrument. You might have seen it." She felt her heart drop. Oh no. No. She hoped that was the end of the topic. She prayed he was only mentioning it casually. Maybe he was just trying to make conversation and would move on to something else, but he didn't. "Would you like to play a little something for us?" he asked. Her stomach turned. She couldn't do that. She wasn't prepared. She wasn't dressed for it. She wasn't emotionally able. She was here as a worker, not a performer. Her voice came out tiny. "I really can't. I'm here to work tonight." The host kept smiling, but the expression in his eyes changed slightly. "No, I insist," he said. "It will just be for fun." Nothing serious. His tone was smooth and polite, but his energy was firm. She knew this was not a suggestion. It was an order dressed like a gentle request. Her hands got cold. Other guests were now watching her face, waiting for her reaction. Some looked curious. Some looked entertained. Like they already expected this to become a little show. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She didn't want to be judged. She didn't want to be seen. "I'm really not comfortable," she said again politely. The host leaned closer slightly, his voice still soft. "It's just one song," he said. "We would all enjoy it, I'm sure." Then he added a sentence that pushed her into a corner. "You don't want to look like you're refusing to cooperate with the host, do you?" Her throat felt tight. She didn't like being cornered. But she knew this world. Wealthy people didn't like being told no. If she refused again, she could risk losing her job or worse, being blacklisted from future events. Her mind tried to calm her down. Maybe if she just played for 1 minute, he would get bored and move on. Maybe this would all be over quickly. Maybe this would just be a tiny moment and then she could go back to being invisible. She closed her eyes for a second, then nodded gently. "All right," she whispered. The host clapped his hands once, pleased. Guests started turning their heads toward the music room, already sensing something new was about to happen. Lila's heart beat faster. She was about to step into a moment she did not choose. She had no idea that this small moment would soon rewrite her future. She could feel her pulse in her throat as she slowly walked toward the room where the piano waited. There was no music coming from the speakers now. Someone must have turned the volume down once they noticed something new was happening. People were curious. They moved like a slow wave in the same direction, following the host and following her. They didn't even try to hide the fact that they wanted to see what would happen next. It felt like she had been placed in the middle of a stage she never asked for. Her steps were careful and tense. Her hands were shaking. Her mind kept saying she should turn back. She should walk away. She should say she can't do this. But she didn't. Not because she wanted to impress anyone. Not because she wanted attention. She simply didn't know how to escape without risking her job. And bills didn't disappear just because she wanted them to. When she entered the music room, she saw the piano more clearly than before. It was beautiful. Something that had been played by skilled hands. Something that had history. Something that had presence. The surface was dark, rich, and polished. The keys were clean and bright. The legs were carved in a strong, elegant shape. It wasn't just expensive, it was powerful. Her breath caught for a second. Her heart squeezed with memories she had pushed away for so long. Memories of a younger version of herself, sitting quietly in practice rooms with her fingers floating over keys. Memories of teachers telling her she had a gift. Memories of performances where people sat in silence just to listen to her play. She pushed those memories down again. She couldn't trust them. They hurt too much. The host stood beside her with a soft smile on his face. His smile didn't make her feel safe. It made her feel like she was being used as entertainment. Like she was a game. Like she was something to laugh about later. He motioned for her to sit down at the bench. "Go ahead," he said. She didn't sit right away. She stared at the piano for a few seconds. She wanted to run. She wanted to leave before the world saw anything. She wanted to disappear into the kitchen and blend back into silence. But she couldn't. She slowly sat down. Her fingertips touched the cool, smooth surface of the keys. The room felt still. People gathered quietly behind her and around her. Some leaned against the doorframe. Some whispered to each other. Some smiled with amusement, ready to watch something awkward. She took a breath that barely reached her lungs. What should she play? She didn't want to pick anything famous or flashy. She didn't want people to think she was trying to show off. She wanted something simple, something honest, something that she remembered from deep inside. That memory wasn't complicated. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a soft, original melody that once helped her sleep during the hardest nights. Something she wrote for herself and never showed anyone. She had written it when she needed comfort, when life felt too heavy. Without speaking, she placed her hands in position. Her fingers began to move. Soft notes filled the room. They weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. But the sound was warm and full. Her touch was gentle but confident. The melody felt like a small story without words. It sounded like hope slipping into darkness, like a quiet cry hidden inside a calm smile. Her fingers slid across the keys with natural grace, and she didn't have to think. Her body remembered the music even though she hadn't touched a real piano in so long. She lost herself in the rhythm. Her breathing calmed, her shoulders relaxed, and suddenly the huge world around her disappeared. She forgot about the host, the wealth, the pressure, the risk, the job. She forgot about everything except the keys under her fingers and the gentle pulse of the melody she had once used to survive. The music traveled through the room like a living thing. It wrapped around the silence. It grew, it softened. It rose and fell like waves brushing against the shore. People stopped talking. No one whispered anymore. Every face turned still. The host was standing just a little behind her, but she didn't notice him. She didn't notice anyone. She only noticed the sound she was creating with her hands. The pure, honest sound of emotion turned into notes. There was no showing off. No effort to impress. No performance tricks. Just real music. Music coming straight from her chest. Some guests didn't understand music fully, but they still felt something shift inside them. The melody wasn't something you needed training to appreciate. It simply felt real. One woman in a silver dress gently placed her hand near her heart because the music touched her in a way she didn't expect. One man who had been laughing loudly earlier now stood quietly and looked at the floor, lost in thought. It was like the room had been transformed into something unrecognizable. No one expected a server to play like this, but she wasn't just a server. Not deep inside. She was something much more. She didn't think about the audience. She didn't think about judgment. Her fingers were steady. They moved like the keys were an extension of her body. The melody grew in intensity just a little, with a soft rise in tone that held emotion inside every note. Then she brought it back down gently so it ended in a tender, soft finish, like a breath fading into silence. When she finished playing, she didn't move right away. She kept her hands resting lightly on the keys. She didn't want to break the moment too fast. It felt too fragile, too precious. She wanted to hold on to the last note as long as she could. When she finally lifted her hands, she felt tears pull behind her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. She didn't want anyone to think she was emotional. She didn't want anyone to see her vulnerability. She slowly stood up. The room still remained quiet for a few seconds. It was as if no one knew how to respond. Their faces looked stunned. They had expected something silly, something awkward, something small. But what they received was something delicate and real. Then a clap came from the back of the room. Another clap followed, and then more. Within seconds, the entire room applauded. The sound of hands hitting together echoed loudly. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It wasn't fake. It was real appreciation. She didn't expect that. She had never expected anyone to clap for her ever again. It felt overwhelming. Her heart beat faster, but this time not from fear. It came from the realization that she had shown a small piece of who she used to be. The applause continued for what felt like forever. She looked down at the floor and then quietly walked away from the piano as the host watched her. His face wasn't smiling anymore. He looked shocked. He looked confused. He looked like someone who didn't know what just happened. He had expected something else. He wanted a small, entertaining moment of embarrassment. He didn't expect her to take the entire room's breath away. She moved through the crowd gently. Some people looked at her with wide eyes. Some whispered to each other with admiration. Some even tried to say something to her, but she didn't stop. She returned to the kitchen area because she needed to breathe again. She needed to be somewhere private. She needed space. She leaned her back against the wall, closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She had no idea what this moment would lead to, but something had just shifted. Something big. Something she never thought would happen again. She didn't expect applause. She didn't expect silence either. She didn't expect anything. She just needed air. She needed a moment to breathe because her heart was beating so hard it felt like her ribs were shaking from the inside. She felt lightheaded, but not in a painful way. More like her body couldn't figure out if she was in the past or the present anymore. The piano had pulled old pieces of her back to the surface, pieces she thought were gone forever. She didn't want attention. She didn't want eyes on her. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just wanted the moment to be over so she could go home, take off her shoes, close her eyes, and forget about all of this. But the moment was not over. Not even close. She tried to step farther into the kitchen area, but before she could catch a full breath, one of the guests followed her. He wasn't pushy. He didn't chase her as if she owed him anything. He just quietly stepped into the same space and stood at a respectful distance, as if he wanted to make sure she didn't feel surrounded. He spoke gently. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to tell you that what you played was very moving." She lowered her eyes a little and gave a small nod to acknowledge his words. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't leave yet. His tone stayed soft and his posture stayed relaxed. He didn't treat her like someone who had done a trick. He spoke like someone who actually felt something. He asked, "Do you mind if I ask where you learned to play like that?" She didn't answer right away. She didn't know how much she should say. She didn't know how much was safe to say. She didn't want to overshare about her life. Workers weren't supposed to share too much of themselves. They were supposed to blend in. They were supposed to be background, safe, invisible, but his voice didn't feel intrusive. His voice wasn't like the host's voice. There was no pressure behind it. There was only curiosity. She took a slow breath. "I studied music for a while," she finally answered. He nodded, waiting. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He didn't ask quickly where, how, when. He waited for her to continue, and that small patience gave her a bit of confidence to speak one more sentence. She said, "I was training to be a professional musician once. I was in a program. They said I had a lot of potential." He raised his eyebrows lightly, not in a shocked way, but more in a way that said he believed her instantly. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She swallowed as memories returned to her chest one by one. Memories she learned to ignore because they hurt too much. "My mother got very ill," she said softly. "I had to leave the program to take care of her. We didn't have anyone else, and medical bills were too expensive. I had to work, so I let the music go." His eyes softened. His face changed from curiosity to understanding. "Maybe even sadness. I'm sorry," he said sincerely. She didn't say anything. She just gave another small nod because there was nothing else she could say. She didn't want sympathy. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't trying to make her story into a tragedy. It was just reality. He asked quietly, "Do you still enjoy playing?" Her eyes looked away again. She looked down at her hands a moment. "I do," she whispered, "but I don't get the chance anymore. I just work now." There was a pause. A soft, gentle silence. A silence that didn't feel heavy. A silence that felt like respect. But the moment didn't stay private for long. More voices approached. More guests came into the kitchen hallway because they wanted to speak to her. She didn't understand why they would follow her there, but they did. They weren't rude, but it felt overwhelming. They weren't trying to take advantage of her, but the sudden attention terrified her. One guest said, "That was incredible. I didn't expect that level of skill." Another guest said, "The emotion in your playing was unbelievable. You could perform professionally." Another added, "Have you recorded anything? You should record something." She didn't know how to respond. It was too much. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to compliments. She wasn't used to being seen. But what surprised her the most was what she heard next. One of the guests said, "I haven't heard anyone play like that in years. I know a music director who specializes in sponsoring young talent." Her heart froze. Sponsor. That word felt like a door she locked away years ago. But she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Her voice wouldn't come out. Before she could gather her thoughts, another guest spoke up. "I work with a foundation," they said. "We support artists who lost their path due to life circumstances. We might be able to help you if you're interested." She didn't answer. The world felt unreal. Her brain couldn't process this sudden change. She came here to work. She came here to earn enough money to pay bills. She didn't come here expecting her old life to knock on her door again, especially not like this. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. The host had entered the kitchen area. His face looked tight. His smile had disappeared entirely. He didn't seem pleased that the attention had shifted away from his party and towards someone he considered just a server. He didn't look angry in a loud, dramatic way. He looked angry in a quiet way, in a way that looked like control slipping out of his hands. He walked toward the group slowly and said in a casual tone, "Everyone, let's not forget why we're here tonight. This is a charity event. Let's return to the main area." His tone was polite, but his eyes were sharp. He wanted to break up the moment. He wanted to redirect all attention away from her. But the guests didn't walk away immediately. Some stayed near her for a moment longer. They said kind words one after another. "You have an extraordinary gift. Don't give up on music again. You deserve a second chance." She felt tears form in her eyes again, but she blinked quickly so they didn't fall. The host watched her closely. His eyes held a strange mix of annoyance and confusion. He did not expect this outcome. He wanted to embarrass her, but instead she became the center of admiration. Guests slowly began drifting away toward the main area, but their expressions remained changed. Some kept glancing back at her with respect. When the kitchen area became quieter again, the host stood in front of her. He didn't smile, he didn't compliment her. Instead, he said in a low voice, "You should get back to serving." She nodded. "Yes, sir." She returned to her work. She picked up glasses again. She poured sparkling drinks again. She moved through the rooms again. But everything felt different now. People didn't look at her the way they did before. They didn't look down on her anymore. Now they looked at her with admiration. She didn't want to let that attention go to her head. She wasn't used to being admired. She wasn't used to being seen as anything other than a quiet worker. But something had changed deep inside her. She could feel it. Her hands still tingled from the piano, keys, and her heart still hummed with the melody she played. The night was not over yet. But for the first time in years, she felt something new. She felt possibility. She felt hope. She walked through the rest of the party like someone who suddenly had two different worlds sitting inside her at the same time. On one hand, she was still holding a tray, still refilling glasses, still collecting empty plates, still doing the job she came here to do. But on the other hand, her mind was somewhere else, floating in a place she had not visited for a very long time. Every time she blinked, she could still feel the piano keys under her fingertips. They felt so real inside her memory that she almost questioned if she had truly stopped playing the piano for years. It felt as if those years had vanished in seconds the moment she sat down at the instrument. She kept her head down while she worked, because she didn't want to draw attention to herself again. But it didn't matter. People kept looking at her anyway. Their eyes followed her as she passed, not in a rude way, not with the dismissive gaze she usually received from wealthy guests. Tonight they looked at her like she was worth something. It felt strange. It felt good, but also uncomfortable, because part of her felt she didn't deserve that kind of attention. Sometimes guests stopped her to say something kind. Sometimes they just smiled and nodded. Sometimes they whispered to each other about her playing. Even when she walked away, she was not used to being noticed. There was a moment when she went to wipe down a small table in the hallway, and she felt her breath catch again. She felt a tiny spark of hope, but she didn't want to trust it too fast. Hope had hurt her before. Hope had been something she used to live on, until life taught her that hope could break your ribs worse than disappointment. She kept telling herself inside her mind, "Don't think too big. Don't read too much into this. Just finish the shift. Just get through the night." But the more she worked, the more her thoughts pulled away from ordinary tasks. After some time, she needed a moment to rest her hands. She set her tray down near a counter in the kitchen and gently shook her fingers out. They felt hot. They felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. It was almost like the sensation of the piano was still there in her muscles. She stood still for a moment with her eyes closed, only for one breath, just to let her mind settle. Then she opened her eyes again and saw another person standing near her. It was not the same calm guest she had talked to earlier. It was a different person, someone she didn't remember seeing close up during the piano moment. She recognized him, though. She had seen him at the table near the front. He had been one of the first people who turned his head when she started to play. He was quiet as he approached. He had an envelope in his hand, but it didn't look like a party envelope meant to hold a business card or invitation. It looked like something older, like a letter someone might keep in a desk drawer. He spoke clearly but gently. "May I speak to you for a moment?" She nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what this was about. He held the envelope out toward her, but he didn't push it into her hands. He waited for her to accept it so she wouldn't feel cornered. "This is not something I usually do," he said calmly, "but I believe your talent is not something that should be ignored." She looked down at the envelope, but her hands did not lift to take it yet. He explained, "I work with a small program. We help artists return to their craft after long breaks. We provide lessons, support, sometimes even financial help if needed." Her heart softened a little, but at the same time she felt nervous. She didn't want to accept something she couldn't promise she could follow through on. She didn't want to disappoint someone else or herself. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, and he didn't become impatient. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said. "You don't need to call her right if you don't want to. But I don't want tonight to become just another forgotten moment." Slowly she lifted her hand and took the envelope. It was light in weight, but heavy in meaning. She held it carefully, almost afraid she might drop it. He gave a small nod, as if he understood her entire life story through the silence. Then he said, "I hope you give yourself a chance again," and after that, he walked away to return to the main room, not pushing, not demanding, not waiting for a reaction. She stood alone for a long moment and stared at the envelope. The ink on it had handwriting on the front, not printed words. It looked personal. It looked real. Her hand shook slightly as she held it. She didn't open it right away. She slipped it into the pocket of her apron so she could keep working without losing it. She didn't tell anyone she received it. She wanted to keep that moment quiet, but she couldn't hide everything. Later, the host passed by again. His expression was still tight. His jaw still looked set in frustration. He didn't say anything to her at that moment, but his look alone told her that he was not happy with the attention she had received. She continued serving. She continued moving through the rooms. She listened to the voices of guests around her. They talked about the charity. They talked about the food. But hidden in their conversations were small sentences about her piano performance. "Did you hear her play? That server could be a professional musician. How did someone like that end up here?" Some comments made her feel hopeful. Some made her feel small again. But either way, the attention stayed. When the party began winding down, she helped with clearing the last tables. She gathered napkins and leftover cups. She placed used utensils into a container for cleaning later. Her feet were tired. Her back hurt. But she didn't complain. She was used to this part of the night. She could see guests slowly leaving the building one by one or in small groups. She heard the sound of shoes on the marble floor. She heard the rustle of coats and jackets being taken from the reception area. She saw their smiles and heard their goodbyes. She stayed behind to continue working. When the last group of guests walked out the door, she finally had a chance to breathe again. The building began to grow quiet. The music that had been playing through speakers earlier had stopped. The main lights dimmed slightly. She reached into her apron and took out the envelope again. She held it in both hands because her fingers felt too shaky to trust one hand alone. She walked to a corner of the kitchen where she could sit on a small stool. She looked at the envelope again and then she slowly opened it. Inside there was a simple card with handwritten information. There was a phone number. There was a name of an organization, and there was one short line written beneath it. The line said, "Your story is not finished yet." She didn't know why, but that sentence hit her harder than anything else had all night. She closed her eyes for a moment and let that sentence repeat in her mind. Her story is not finished yet. For years she had lived as if her dreams were done. She believed her future was already decided forever. She worked, she survived, she kept going because she had to, not because she had anything to look forward to. But now there was this small possibility sitting inside her pocket. She didn't tell anyone what she felt. She didn't jump in excitement. She didn't cry out loud. She just sat in silence, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. She could almost hear a piano again inside her head. She could almost imagine walking into a music room again. The night was ending. But something inside her was just beginning again, and she was afraid of it, but also strangely ready for it. When she finally left the event hall that night, the sky outside was quiet. The streets were almost empty, except for a few cars in the distance. The air felt colder than before, but not in a harsh way. It was the kind of cold that made people breathe more deeply. It made everything feel honest. She carried her small bag over her shoulder, and inside her apron pocket she carried the envelope. She held the envelope close to her side while she walked to the bus stop. Her feet were sore. Her back hurt from bending and carrying trays, but her hands felt warm as if they still remembered the keys. She looked down at her hands a few times while waiting for the bus. They looked the same as they always had, but they felt different. They felt like they had a new purpose again. She sat down on the bus and leaned against the window. City lights passed by quickly. The world moved outside, but she stayed still inside her seat. She looked at people getting on and off at different stops. Those people didn't know what had happened earlier tonight. They didn't know she had played music in front of strangers and changed the entire mood of the room. They didn't know a small piece of her life, a piece she thought was dead, had come back to life. She didn't need them to know. It was enough that she knew. When she got off the bus and walked through her quiet street, she noticed the little things she never noticed before. The way the streetlights cast soft shadows on the sidewalk, the sound of leaves brushing against each other in the wind, the dark windows of houses where families were already asleep. Life felt slow here, gentle but heavy. She reached her small apartment building and walked up the narrow stairs. When she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it for a moment and allowed the silence to surround her. She slipped off her shoes and put her bag down on the table. The apartment felt the same as always, tiny, quiet, simple. But tonight it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place where something new might begin. She placed the envelope on the table and sat down in the one chair she owned. She took out the card again and looked at it under the small lamp. She had read the words already, but she read them again. "Your story is not finished yet." That sentence kept circling in her mind like music. She took a deep breath and let her body relax. She didn't call the number right away. She didn't make any dramatic decision. She just let the possibility exist. She let the hope settle gently without rushing it. It felt better that way. She was tired. But for the first time in a long time, she was tired with purpose. She took a warm shower and changed into comfortable clothes. She sat on her small couch and thought about the piano again. She remembered how the keys felt under her fingers. She remembered the way the room changed when she started playing. She remembered the faces of people who listened to her, faces full of quiet wonder. Those expressions were not fake. They were honest. She closed her eyes and allowed the music to echo inside her memory. This time she didn't push it away. Hours passed. The sky grew darker. The room stayed quiet. But her mind stayed awake. She did not sleep much that night. The next morning when sunlight touched her window, she woke up early. She didn't feel like staying in bed. She made a small cup of tea and sat back at the same table. The envelope was still there. The card was still inside. She kept looking at it, wondering if today was the day. Her phone sat beside the card. All she had to do was dial a number, but she wasn't ready yet. Sometimes people need time to shift their heart before they take a step. She got ready for work again. Not at the mansion this time. She had her usual shift at a small cafe. She put on her uniform, tied her hair back, packed her bag, and left the apartment. She took the bus like always and walked into the cafe like always. But she didn't feel like the same person she was before the party. During her break, she sat outside at a small metal table and watched people pass by. She took out the envelope again. She ran her thumb along the corner of it. She didn't open it this time. She just held it and thought. Some part of her feared disappointment. What if this wasn't real? What if calling led to nothing? What if hope hurt again? But another part of her whispered, what if it didn't? Later that week, she went to the public library and sat at one of the tables. She searched on their computer about the organization written on the card. She typed the name with careful fingers, and when she saw the results, she felt a small wave of relief wash over her. It was real. The program was real. The support was real. She printed out a page that explained how it worked. She folded the paper and put it in her bag. She didn't call the number right away even after that, but the possibility felt stronger. Days passed slowly. Every night she placed the card on the table beside her tea. Every morning she looked at it again. She did not rush herself. She allowed her fear to breathe. She allowed her courage to slowly grow. One evening after her cafe shift, she opened her window and let fresh air fill the room. She sat on her couch again and looked at her hands. She whispered to herself, "Music is still in me." And for the first time, she believed it. She took her phone in her hand. Her fingers hovered over the numbers. Her heart beat faster the closer her fingertip reached the screen. This wasn't just a phone call, this was a door. She dialed the number. She held the phone to her ear, listening to the ringing sound. Each ring felt like a step forward. Each ring felt like she was walking toward her own future. On the fourth ring, someone picked up. A calm voice greeted her. She took a deep breath and spoke quietly. "Hello. I think I'd like to talk about the program." The voice on the other side smiled through the tone alone. She could hear it. They asked her a few simple questions. Nothing heavy, nothing intimidating. They wanted to set up a meeting so they could talk in person. They told her they had space available. She wrote down the meeting time on a small piece of paper. After she ended the call, she sat in silence for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear this time. It was change. She placed her phone down and looked around her small living space again. Nothing in the room had changed, but everything about her had. She finally allowed herself to smile. She didn't know exactly what was waiting for her in the future. She didn't know if she would become a professional musician. She didn't know if everything would work out perfectly, but she did know one thing with absolute certainty. She had taken the first step. She had chosen possibility. She had chosen hope. And that alone meant her story was still moving forward. Her story was not over. Not by far.